Next, we will examine what enterprise architecture frameworks are. But first, we will take a brief detour from enterprise architecture and consider what other kinds of frameworks we work with in our daily life. If you think about it, there are many examples that we can come up with. For example, consider the combination of road signs, traffic signals, and traffic rules. Put together, they represent a framework, don't they? A finite set of simple rules that can be comprehended and learned quickly by most people and applied to a whole gamut of terrains, conditions, and circumstances. Notice how a simple collection of rules immediately puts a lid on the complexity and brings about order, definition, and a consistent approach to how traffic must be conducted and managed in almost any kind of situation. Now consider another example from a very different discipline, the periodic table of elements. We know that periodic table of elements presented using a simple one-pager represents all known elements to mankind. And we also know that elements are deliberately organized using simple principles such as the atomic number, electron configurations, and recurring chemical properties. This organizing framework makes it easy for someone who is looking up the elements in the table to infer a great deal about it just by looking at its position within the periodic table. But obviously, these principles were not arrived at randomly, but rather through distillation of observations, analysis, and discoveries of many practitioners in the field of chemistry. And without this framework of reference, it is not hard to imagine how daunting the study of elements could be. What other frameworks can we think of that impact and govern our daily lives? How about legal frameworks, constitutions of nations, cultural etiquettes, the Gregorian calendar? Now, based on these examples, could we say frameworks are thinking tools that help us organize concepts, knowledge, and understanding, and also help us in codifying the best practices and approaches to solve a set of problems within the context of a domain? Frameworks tend to standardize the language of the domain, don't they? For example, consider a traffic violation. When a violation occurs, you can very clearly describe the nature of the violation in the specific language of that domain, describing the nature of the violation, the severity of the violation, and even associate some metadata to go with it to describe and illustrate how severe that violation was. These definitions and standardizations enable consistent interpretation of the framework by its end users. It is not too difficult to imagine the kind of confusion an inconsistent interpretation of traffic rules, for example, might cause. Now, getting back to enterprise architecture frameworks, they are not too different from any of the other frameworks that we have just discussed. So just like any other frameworks, they define concepts, methods, processes, and the language of the enterprise architecture domain, which enables consistent definition and interpretation by all stakeholders involved. And standardization based on a framework brings order, consistency, and clarity to a field which is by default dominated by strong opinions and variety of specialist approaches. Thereby, it has an effect of reducing confusion and potentially endless arguments. And what is that collective noun for architects again? Is it an argument of architects? Well, anyway, just like how a framework of a simple set of traffic rules can be adapted to a variety of terrains and circumstances, the enterprise architecture frameworks offer various templates that can be adapted to a variety of enterprises, irrespective of their pursuits. In a nutshell, the value proposition of the enterprise architecture frameworks is to help establish a common set of concepts, a shared vocabulary, language, and processes to simplify collaborative architecture work.